Okay, we go ahead and we like to have these recorded. So if you can't be here with us, we know Sunday nights can be a really busy night with you and your family. So we are always happy to have whoever we have here. And it looks like we have a good group tonight. Just a few logistics. If you have questions, if you will please use the Q&A for any type of questions, that just helps Luke and I stay a little bit more organized. If you've never been to one of these before, what we typically do is we will talk about a concept for a short period. Sometimes we take the whole period and just questions come up around that. Sometimes it's just a short period and then we move into general Q&A. The focus of this is a place where couples who are navigating recovery have a place that they can come together and they can hear the same information. And hopefully this can spark some really good dialogue between the two of you and help you navigate and work through different topics that come up in recovery, because recovery and healing is really hard work. And we'll get into this in a minute, but when you go through something like this and it impacts the relationship, there's so many pieces to healing that you have to navigate. And it's not like you suddenly, like the relationship just gets put on hold. Often you're still living together or you still have kids together and you're still trying to navigate the relationship with now all of these extra complexities. And so hopefully doing things like this can just help that navigation process just a little bit more. So Luke and I are both professionals who work in the realm of recovery addiction. I am a marriage family therapist, and I can now say I am a CSAT candidate. I just finished my training today, which was kind of cool. And Luke is a men's mental health and addiction recovery coach, and we both have been working our own recovery. I think we're coming up on 9 years now. So we do this professionally, but we also have lived and watched this experience. So before we get started in tonight's topic, just a couple of quick little announcements. We have a couples group starting. We are going to officially start opening up opportunities for those who want to sign up for that. It will start in the beginning of April. It will be Monday nights. Do you remember what time, Luke?
Monday nights at 5:30 Pacific.
5:30 Pacific, 6:30 Mountain. So if you are interested in signing up for that, the couples that would be a good fit for this course would be couples who there is active sobriety. We are not having slips or relapses or continuing to traumatize our partner. And for partners, you are not in active trauma. You're not in that fight, flight, or freeze all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have triggers from time to time, but you do feel fairly stable enough that we can sit in a couples group and you can hear us talk about both sides of the couple, and you're in a place that you could hear other couples, male and female, be able to talk about their experiences. So we are pretty excited for that to get started. And the information on that will be coming out in the next week or two. And enrollees, or you can enroll for that. If you are interested in more information or getting on a wait list, you can email our assistant, Vanessa, or our office manager, Vanessa. She's amazing. It's info@chooserecoveryservices.com. Did I miss anything with that?
No, I think that's good. I think
Okay.
feel free to use the chat, y'all, if you have any questions on it. Or excuse me, not the chat, but the Q&A. And please use the Q&A for your questions. Sometimes the chat, we can get a little lost with what happens over there. So appreciate using the chat.
And then the only other group that I'm going to highlight, I know that there's a few others that I want to highlight and I can't remember the specifics. So I'm going to look them up and I'll probably share them at the end, because getting that specialized help really can make a difference. I do have a group called Leaning In. It is for women only who are further in their recovery and traditional betrayal trauma groups. You feel like you've kind of passed that, but you are still in the relationship and you would like to be able to lean in a little bit into the relationship. but you're feeling still some of that fear and concern, and you feel yourself holding back, it's a group for women who are in that place. And that is held Monday mornings. So if you're interested in any of our groups, let us know. The couples group is, I can't remember. I would have to look it up. And I don't want to tell you wrong. So I will look up that as well, and I'll let you know at the end the cost of that one. I'd hate to give one price and then it comes out as something different. So hang tight and I'll get that information. Okay. I think, Luke, I've done all the intro stuff, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, you got the screen share. You got the. We'll need that.
Yeah. I will dig that up.
Okay. Okay. All right, y'all. Sunday nights. Just getting back from the airport. Snowy weather. We moved to the part of the country where the snow is heavy, and forgot what it was like to drive in that stuff. So my brain is just dealt with the driving piece, but I'm confident that this topic we're going to talk about today, we'll be able to have a good discussion about it. So again, use the chat if you just want to comment on the content. Love the comments. The comments are useful. They're wonderful. But if you want something specific answered, please use the Q&A, and we'll make sure that gets hit. Okay, so there's this, we're going to talk about mostly the man side of the journey experience when it comes to his evolution of his recovery. I remember sitting in my therapist's office early on, and one of the things that he told me is he said, Luke, I hope you never ever have a relapse or a slip. Slip is defined as you cross your values, but you immediately own up to it, and you're not caught, and you don't sit in it for a while. You have accountability. He said, I hope you don't have that, but I'm less concerned about the slip as I am the relapse. How quickly you stand up and what you learn from your experience. And I just remember with him, and Alana's going to address the triggers that might come up for the partners here in just a moment after I say this. I remember just with him going like, okay, yeah, I can't have any of those. I can't do the slip thing. Like, my marriage is hanging on by a bare thread. And I really had that. And I don't know if he was just used to working with people like me or what, but I could tell he was really trying to impress in my mind, this isn't about you being perfect from here on out. It's about you being aware of where you're at. And I couldn't hear it. Like, I just couldn't. And I put Alana through enough, and I was in enough pain myself, that I think I had probably a month or 2 or 3, or really until Alana was starting to from my observing, less triggered. Before the intensity of the experience started to wear off. Because immediately what I thought was, this is so bad, this is so horrible, I never want this to happen again. And what I viewed that as in that moment was change. And I will never go back and do that again. And I actually said that to myself like thousands of times. But this time, because I decided to share a bunch of truth with it, I really felt like that. So what my therapist was trying to impress like into my brain is like, that pain's going to wear off, and you're going to go back to a state of not feeling like you're in so much pain. And it's important for you to know where you're at and have clarity around it. So what we want to talk about today is the slow downward spiral progression. And I won't even call it slow, or regression, digressing, whatever you want to call it, from doing really good in your recovery, feeling like things are going the right direction, to eventually a relapse. The wheels falling off the bus, all that kind of stuff. And Alana, were you able to find it?
I was, yeah.
And this will be good for the partners to be able to hear it. because they'll be able to, hopefully will create a little clarity around what that looks like, because you're having to use your intuition of like, hey, is my partner telling me the truth? Is he being honest with me? And it doesn't usually typically all fall apart overnight. It's slow regression. Alana, you want to comment any of that before we start show slides?
Just really quick, I'm hoping that link works for the person who needed the passcode. Usually if you use the direct link from the email, it should go through. I just wanted to address that really quick. With this, with partners, I have so much empathy, because even someone using words like slips and relapse and talking about it, to me, for a long time, felt really dangerous. It felt really scary. And I was very much of, you will never do this again. You do this again, I'm out. And I wanted perfection. I knew logically that he had to learn and grow, and there were so many pieces he had to figure out. And I also could see, as he really started to dive into his work, I'd have these moments where I would be like shocked at how much work I could see needed to be done, which is a whole nother topic. Just in the CSAT training, they have 30 different tasks, and each task has all of these other pieces that have to be learned for somebody who is working recovery. And there was a lot of work to be done. But even so, if you're hearing Luke talk about slips and relapses, and his therapist back in the day telling him, hey, it's less about the relapse and it's more about how you are going to work through this, and it's about what you're doing moving forward. And all of that felt so scary and so threatening to me, threatening to my safety. So logically, I could hear it. Emotionally, all of my protectors were a big hell no. All of my protectors were coming up. And so I just want to make space that if you're having this kind of like emotional reaction to this, and logically you're going, okay, I want to hear and I want to learn, but there's this emotional reaction, just know that you're not alone in that. I think this is really important to talk about with couples, because I think sometimes we set partners up for unrealistic expectations of what healing looks like. Because you look at a little kid who's learning to walk. And now, okay, before I give my analogy, this is not permission to act out. This is not permission to have slips. I am not giving that permission. So I want to make that clear for both partners. And when a child is learning to walk, they just don't instantly decide of like, oh, I want to walk now. Here I go and walk. Actually, some little kids do. They're amazing. But the majority of children, that's not the way it works. The majority of children is, there is this learning process, and there's these steps that come, and usually there's some tumbles and there's some falls. And so what we want to do, and what we're going to show you tonight, is getting a really clear visual of what this downward spiral can look like, and then talk about how we can prevent it, how we can put barriers in place that can help protect both of you, to protect the person who has acted out and does not want to go back to that, and protect the partner who is so afraid of being hurt again. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. So if you're a partner with me and you're like, oh, what are you going to say? Just know I've got you. We've got you in mind.
I did want to make sure that one partner, her husband, gets on here. So I did.
Oh, good.
I
Put
did
the webinar and passcode. Thank you.
try to get the webinar and passcode out there. So, but I want to make sure I put it to everyone.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about that, Alana. For me, when my therapist said, hey, you know what, Luke, it's not about the slip. I mean, I care less about the slip. By the way, let me define in my brain what a slip is and what a relapse is. I believe, and I know, Alana, you can clarify this because I know this even makes you a little uncomfortable. Slips are possible. They can be part of the journey of healing. Relapses are not. Okay. So I want to define the difference. If a person ends up acting outside their values, and it happens in a way that was different than before and was a different experience, and their addict brain kicked in, if that's a lot, and that they had that experience one time, and then what they do is they immediately own with their accountability person, like a sponsor or somebody that's in their trusted group, and then they figure out what happened, and they get with their spouse in a really short period of time and say, hey, just so you know, and they provide a lot of empathy and a lot of transparency and a lot of clarity around it. That is a lot different than somebody who has a relapse that just basically, lack of a better word, gets their money worth for a period of time before they actually come through and own it. Because they're like, well, I made a mistake, so I might as well just, be here for a little while, because one or two more times aren't going to hurt. Relapse, slip, relapse. And I know it's not that clear and that defined. There's so many nuances to it, but when we talk about that, relapses are a different thing. We have to recognize them as such.
Well, and what we're talking about here tonight is we want to be able to help you prevent both. Because if you're on this journey and you're here, I'm going to believe that you don't want this in your life. You don't want this in your life. You don't want this in your marriage. And so our goal is to help give some tools that both of you can move forward past this. And this journey will not always look perfect.
Yeah, totally.
I have yet to meet a single person who has had a perfect recovery. I've had some who have claimed to have a perfect recovery. And that to me is more concerning than somebody who really is able to see and own the areas, the shortcomings they have, and then see and own when they do not do it the way they want, and are, just like you said, are able to use that to learn and grow and move forward from that falling forward.
And I'm going to make some assumptions that y'all are going to already having some question around this. So don't be shy as I walk through this slide, or if you've had something to now, to use the Q&A. All right, Alana, you want to share the slide?
Yeah. Give me 2 seconds.
You're fine. Take your time.
There we go. Here's the first one.
Okay, so I want you to notice this. I kind of envision it a little bit more like than a ball that falls down into the water, but more like you have a snowball, and the snowball captures and gains momentum. So we can call that snowball that goes down this slope or this hill. We can call that your experience, your journey into a relapse or a slip. And to Lana's point, we want to capture both. So what we're going to do is give some markers along the way that show the addict brain and what it looks like in a healthy space, which is the very top, to eventually the downward spiral or into a slip or a relapse. Okay. And you'll notice this is called a relapse prevention / addiction cycle. So what we're going to recognize here is the next slide that we're going to be showing is going to be what we do to stop. Because this snowball that goes downhill gains momentum. And if we captured earlier, then that's clarity. And that's not what happens in our addict brain, is clarity. So the first thing that comes up here is we have obsession / preoccupation. So I'm going to just refer to a man because that's the most typical of what we're used to here. So we have the man, the addict, that's going through their recovery, through their experience. And what happens is they have, let me bring back a phrase you've heard me use often, which is porn isn't my problem. It's a solution to my problem. The problem is I mismanage my emotions. So basically, I don't know as a man how to deal with my stress, my overwhelm, my depression, my anxiety, my boredom, all these different types of emotions and feelings that are strong. And what they do is they cause the ball to move. And as I start to feel those heavy emotions, I start to move back into an addiction cycle, okay? I start to look for a release from my pain. And what happens is because I'm looking for something new to solve my pain, and the way that we actually learn to be in recovery is instead of running from the pain or numbing the pain, we actually give the pain space. We actually acknowledge it and we sit with that pain. We sit with that emotion. We sit with that feeling. And what naturally happens when we sit with emotion and feelings, they evolve and they go away or they turn into something else. But if we don't, then we go back into an addict cycle. And the first thing that we do is we recognize that that obsession / preoccupation means that we have a well-worn pathway inside of our brain that if we're still in the journey of recovery, and it can, again, this is a year's process. In fact, I heard the other day, just a couple of days ago, that this, 3 to 5 year process of healing those pathways inside of our brain. So I'm going to go into obsession and preoccupation around. Alana, you look like you're going to say something. Were you going to say anything?
I was. Yeah, good catching that. Well, okay. So in our CSAT training, they showed brain scans of those who had sexual addictions and how their brains had lit up when they saw certain images, way more equal to drug users, way more than people who hadn't struggled with sexual addiction. And somebody raised their hand and asked the question. They said, okay, but do their brains, does it go down? So their brains look like regular brains. And Ken Adams, he was the one doing the training. He said, no, interestingly enough, that part of their brain still lights up the same, but what changes is their brain, all of these other spots of healthy recovery lights up that didn't light up before. So even though that part still lights up, we have these other tools in place that now the brain has these other neural pathways that can override those initial pathways that are there, but those pathways don't disappear. And so what you're talking about, I just want to make it super clear. This is not just for people who are in the beginning of the journey. This is for the guy who's 5 years in, 10 years in, 25 years in, because that neural pathway is still there. And if we start slipping down the slope and we start letting go of these healthy skills that we're going to show you some of the barriers in a minute, but if we start letting go of those things and we start going down this path, that part of our brain is still there. And so it's just a really important thing to be aware of. No matter where we are for the rest of your life, we have to be aware of this.
I just loved it when they were talking about it's a new life with new experiences. We put those new experiences in that new life into the same place that our addiction used to be. So, okay, so we're going along our life. You'll notice there's some words here underneath obsession and preoccupation, like lifestyle and balance. This is a big one we see come into play, like big things that pop up that really scare a partner. Like there's a job change, maybe a baby's born, maybe, I don't know, maybe a death in the family. Those big ones, a move, a change, maybe a promotion.
Well, in those big ones, a lot of times we see them let go of those daily healthy habits that keep you sober, that keep you living a life in recovery, not just sobriety, but recovery.
So what happens is there's these experiences with lifestyle imbalance from these heavy things that happen that all of a sudden the brain needs to cope and have an experience. But because it's amplified, then obsession and preoccupation kicks in, which is, you notice it has euphoric recall in here, some impaired thinking, which is around, all of a sudden I haven't given my brain a chance to go to my healthy things because of a lifestyle imbalance. And all of a sudden my brain is able to recall because actually, let me just back up here just a second. Our brains, when we're using addiction, when we have addiction, it's just a means of survival. So it's just a means of being able to cope with our experience. So if our brain doesn't have the right stuff to be able to survive, it was so good at problem solving, it'll enter into a place of basically it's going to short circuit, it's going to short wire and find the path of least resistance to solving the problem. So a lot of that obsession / preoccupation with old patterns, old things start to come into play. Maybe it's YouTube, because that's a way to just kind of deal with the pain. Maybe it's how, and these are the start of the downward spiral. Like in and of itself, the behavior isn't bad. It's not something that's really to the untrained eye, not even a big deal. It's very easily justified. Okay, so
Can I talk about that really quick, that justified word?
please.
One of the first task that you have to do in coming out of the addiction cycle is coming out of denial. And most of the time, we don't even know what our denials are. And so when you just said justification, there are a lot of justifications, and there is a lot of denial that we do with ourselves. And so we have to get really clear, especially when we're in a good place, of what those denials look like, so we can recognize when those justifications and when those denials start happening. And I will just ask of you men to trust your wife when she is seeing the justifications, because every part of you is going to want to deny that and defend that and not see it. But because her brain is so hyper focused on her safety, she will probably see it way before you see it, because her brain is constantly looking for, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? So she will probably see those before you do.
Yeah, I love that. And Alana uses the phrase that I automatically get defensive with, which is, hey, Luke, you seem off to me. And I view it, my addict brain views this as an attack. It views as, hey, you're not enough. You're a crappy husband. And really what she's trying to do is just point out some patterns that are uncomfortable. And she comments on, or some dialogue around. But if I'm in a bad space, I'm really quick to defend, and I never circle back to what I'm actually hearing her say. Okay, ritualization. Let's just go there for a minute. All right, so this is what makes sexual addiction so hard. Sexual misbehavior, the lack of sexual self-mastery, is because when you get through that obsession and preoccupation, it turns into ritualization. It turns into getting a little taste of your drug without actually experiencing a full-on acting out, the initial slip. And it's really a part of the addiction cycle. Like I heard somebody say one time, it'd be easier with, and this isn't trying to minimize anybody that's gone through alcoholism, or a drug addiction, but you can put that stuff on a shelf, you can put it away. But when it comes to pornography or use, the stuff that you can store inside of your brain and get the same hit off of it, you technically don't have to have a slip in order to still get a benefit from recalling the experience. So that can be anything that will keep you in that space for a period of time that will allow you to get some of that stuff without actually slipping. And this is stuff that's it can be really kind of scary. So you'll notice boundary collapses are in there. So you notice yourself, the things that you use to keep yourself safe, maybe like going to meetings at a certain frequency, the type of people you interact with, the type of conversations you have, your use around media or technology. It's because you're starting to literally lose touch with your rational part of your brain, because now you're into the ritualization. You're getting your drug without having your drug yet. And you'll notice loss of control. There's really no coping strategies. You're losing control. Keep going, Alana. You got any comments there?
Yeah. No, you'll just notice this ball going down the hill. It goes faster and faster and faster as it goes. And so this can be a really slow descent for some people. Like if you're 20 years in, you may have this slow descent over a year. Or if you're new in the beginning, this descent might happen over a day. And so I think it's really important to just kind of recognize too, that the movement of this ball can look different for each of us. But the further we go down this, the faster it's going to go, whether you're 25 years in or you're 5 days in.
Yeah. And one thing that I want to point out that's really important is if anybody that's gone through this has noticed, once they get to like ritualization and they go, oh my gosh, I just found myself like scrolling on YouTube, like that wasn't good. And what they do is they get scared by that and they go, oh, so I must be better now. Like I've just got scared by that again. That's totally a part of the process. You're nowhere different. You're still in your ritualization stage. You still haven't brought back in your wasted have healthy coping strategies. You haven't shared with others the high risk situations. You haven't reestablished boundaries and recognized what happened. You're still in the ritualization stage, even though you're scared. It makes you feel like you're not there, and then you stay there. Okay, so now we're back into sexual compulsion, or not back into it. We've now gotten to there, which is now we have the initial slip. And again, all of a sudden there's that fear there, like, you can't believe that happened again. I've gone such a long period of time.
Okay, can I ask you a question on the fear really quick?
Sure.
Because it sounds like what you're saying is the fear almost can give a false sense of security sometimes, of like, I'm feeling this fear, therefore I'm not going to do it again, or it's not going to get worse.
Yeah.
It's a false sense of security, even though you don't really feel secure.
The fear just drives us deeper into denial if we're in isolation. So I just want to say that again. The fear just drives us deeper into denial, and as long as we're in isolation, we're not talking about it. We're not getting support from professionals and those that are fighting side by side with us that are going through the same experience. So anyway, it's funny, in this setting, I want to seek feedback on that and go, does that make sense? But can't do that. All right. So you have the initial slip, and then the one I've noticed that is, if the men that don't see it, then what they do is they're accountable, they're transparent about it. The next one's just right around the corner. Like, it's just right there. Like, it's not all is lost depending on how you show up. And that's through this whole entire experience. I don't like the way that just came out, by the way. I want to go back a few seconds. Along the way, the minute accountability happens somewhere along this journey, then something different is happening. And we're going to talk about it here in a second. Okay, so you got your abstinence. Go ahead.
So really quick, what you just highlighted there is how important accountability is. I just want to really highlight that, how important accountability is in this, because I know for partners, that right there, they want to see that accountability, and seeing that accountability is so healing and so helpful for the relationship. It's helpful for the individual who's acted outside of their values, and for the relationship. There's so many pieces to the accountability that's so important. And
the accountability does not happen. You're often, it's so cool to see the women that are doing this, that have boundaries in place, that have okay, this is what happens if my husband has a close call or a slip or a relapse. I know exactly what to do, because that is I don't know how hard of a place that is. I've only just observed it. Okay. What men do is they know their wife's boundaries, and they go, okay, I know there's a 24-hour period of time that I need to be transparent with my experience. The first thing I need to do is be accountable for my experience. That is with my sponsor. That is with my therapist. That is with my coach. That is with those trusted people that can help me think clearly. Okay. Now what happens is you have a new path that goes into place. So let's go really quick here. It's just, again, it's momentum. So let's talk about what it looks like. This other slide. You want to go there, Alana?
Yep. And before I switch slides, I'll show it on the other one. Okay, so here is with our barriers in place. Can you see that okay?
Yeah. It's still a little fuzzy, but I think it'll work.
Yeah, it was a bad slide to start with. So that's as clear as we're going to get. But you'll notice at the bottom is we have the despair, the secret life, the shame, the guilt, the hopelessness, and the pain. And that right there, I just want to make space for a minute on how utterly painful that is. And sometimes the acting out can numb us to that pain. But when we really start working recovery and we start seeing that, and we're making space for that, it's a dark, heavy place to be. And if you are at the beginning of your journey and you're feeling that, like you feel like you are just living in that, whether you are the one who's acted out or you're the betrayed partner, I just want to give you this little tiny bit of hope that it will get better. If you keep working the tools and if you keep moving forward on this healing journey, it does get better. But this is what addiction brings. And this is what sexual acting out brings when you're going outside of your values and outside of what the relationship has agreed.
Yeah. I remember the first time that I shared with Alana a close call that I had. Anyway, I ended up being on a device, downloading an app that had an art store on it, and looking at material that wasn't a slip, but it was dangerous. And I remember like, I don't want to tell her. And I remember talking to my therapist, and he's like, that's part of the journey. And he's like, he tried to take the emotion out of me telling her. I remember telling her, and like, and being so freaking scared of my own shadow in this instant. And that was really, really hard for Alana, is what I observed. And I remember telling her, and it just being really hard. And we, she had all of her pain. I tried to hold space for it, and how big of a deal it was. And I know I'm speaking a little bit for you, Alana, that I was able to show a shift with my patterns in my life of coming forward and showing it. But I got no kudos, no credit for that. Like, that wasn't like, she's like, oh yeah, this is amazing, you are shifting patterns. She still had a response to my transparency about my experience. It was still really, really scary. So men, like, please do not use your wife as a barometer to when you change your patterns and show up after processing through with other people, whether you did it the right way or not. Because there's still a lot of sadness with the fact that there was a close call there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you see some barriers here. So this is just supposed to be the snowball going downhill, and there's things that catch it. So the things that catch it to begin with, just to make sure we don't go downward down there, you got your recovery essentials. Those are the people that are in your network. Personal craziness index, not going to go into it a whole bunch. It's just an index you can use to see if you're emotionally off, because you got a lot of things in your life that are, are causing you to not live in a rational state of mind. It's not about being perfect, but it's about being aware, and you're constantly evaluating it. Understanding what healthy sex and relationship plan looks like. That you're no longer feeling shame about your sexuality, and your relationship, your recovery commitment. Just overall, you're recognizing that the very, very most important thing before any relationship is that relationship with self that has your recovery in there, and that becomes the very most important thing in your life. More important than your intimate relationship, more important than your spiritual relationship, it is your relationship with self. Okay, then what you have is, if you do manage to go down, which can be a part of the experience of recovery, into obsession and preoccupation, there's some reality checks that come into play. Those are the people in your life that can speak truth to you. I had one the other day where a man wanted to call something a close call, and then he called up his brother and shared it, and he's like, dude, that's like a slip. What are you talking about? Like, I love you, but stop being a moron. Like, and then he could say it because they were good friends, and he knew he loved him. Boundaries list. So all of a sudden we have these boundaries that make us recognize we're in preoccupation and we're in obsession, because we go, that's not safe behavior. I'm behaving in really crazy ways right now. Alana, can you speak to competing passion and rewards? Why is that slipping my mind? Do you know?
Yeah, that one is where we have other healthy things that are taking up our energy. And so that's a really healthy boundary, is where before the addiction or the sexual acting out took up a good chunk of our brain space. And if we remove that and we don't have these good, healthy things to put in the place, then we have this massive void, and then the void can lead us back to the vortex of acting out. And so when we can add in healthy passions and healthy rewards and those healthy things in our life, that those help take the place of where the brain space that the addiction once held. And so, and especially with the nice, healthy passions, that's giving our brain those chemicals that we were getting in unhealthy ways through the acting out. Now we're getting those healthy chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin in nice, healthy ways.
I saw a comment or a question in the chat. This person said, could you go deeper into relationship with self? Let me just touch on that and let me know if you have any follow-up questions. So immediately, the reason why I wanted to stop looking at porn and quit acting out with others is because I wanted to stay in my marriage. I was afraid of losing something. And ultimately, I was afraid of being alone. I didn't want to be alone. How gross is that, right? That's what I was concerned about. You could never have got me to see that, but I can see it clearly now. Okay, so I started doing this stuff where the reason why I was trying to be sober was for other people. It was for my kids. It was for my wife. It was for my God. It was for these other people. Here's the deal. Let me explain this. There was never going to be enough. It was never going to be enough. My wife, my kids, and my God, because I was never liked myself to begin with. I was never enough. So all I had to do was get a little sideways with my thinking. And because I was doing it for other people, it didn't really matter anyway. Did that make sense, Alana?
I laughed because I knew what you were going to say, and I could see the discomfort of, oh crap, I'm going to say this, and it might be hard for people. It's not that the partner isn't enough. It's not that I wasn't enough for Luke. It wasn't my kids weren't enough for him. It was I could not be enough for him because he wasn't enough for himself. It was his own things that didn't allow those external things to be enough. And so this internal work and this building the relationship with yourself and learning how to love yourself is such important, essential work. And you go back to along the bottom here of this despair and the shame and the pain. That shame is so damaging to your self-worth at such a deep level. And even those, especially with those who have more of the narcissistic tendencies, even those who are like, no, I'm fine, I have good self-esteem. If you are acting outside of your values, I guarantee we got some denial mechanisms happening. And when we strip all of that away, which usually takes a lot of work and a lot of therapy to strip all that away, there usually is a lot of self-loathe.
Yeah.
We have to be able to heal that.
It's so toxic because it's a self-esteem thing. It's really what it is because I value myself only as much as I am having these certain things. So, people say, hey, I'm enough when I have, a nice car or a nice house or social status. But we even do it with, connection with God. Like, I'm not enough unless I'm connected to God, or I'm not enough unless my relationship with my wife is completely solid. Like, we're just great. I'm not enough unless I'm sober. And what's interesting is intrinsically, that's a values based. I mean, that's a self-esteem thing, which is at the root of the addiction.
This topic on just rebuilding the self-worth, rebuilding self-trust, because those who have sexually acted out usually don't trust themselves. This could be a whole webinar or course just by itself because it's such a big piece. So if this is resonating with you, what Luke's saying, I highly encourage you to do some one-on-one work with this, because this to me can be some of the most rewarding work.
Yeah, for sure. The first slide, I'm just reading a question here. The first slide, is that only to prevent a relapses, or is the same for preventing a slip? So yeah, the slip is just before the relapse. So it's
all of it. Yeah, it's for all of it.
Okay, so is this chart somewhere I can look at it more closely? Alana, you want to answer that?
Not right now. This chart is a CSAT chart, and I would like to, at some point on my own, kind of add to it and make it a snowball, and I'd like to monkey with it. So at some point, we'll hopefully have some kind of handout for this, but for now, this is what we got.
And where we'll still continue to give ITAP their credit, right?
100%. Yep, this is ITAP's chart.
Okay, is acceptance of sexual self important independent of a relationship sex? Yeah. Oh my goodness, yes, totally. you do have a sexual relationship with yourself, and that how you view your own sexuality is so important. And that is something all on itself. So we'll probably be tackling that in the future.
And
Okay.
I'll just say really quick, the whole theme of doing the 5 8-hour days of the CSAT training over and over and over, they kept saying, we're not trying to shut down sexuality. We're not trying to just turn that off. We're trying to create a healthy relationship with our sexual self. So absolutely, it's important.
Okay, so we have these other barriers, and just want to point out that the further the barriers are down, the harder it is because there's more momentum. So go down to barrier number 3. So when it comes to ritualization, what's going to keep us from going further down is the boundary checks that we have. You know, we call these fire drills, which is basically, if I run into ritualization, I have a planned behavior that I do to bring me back into reality. You know, letters to self. So these can be really good when you start to journal. That's a big one to bring yourself out of ritualization, because we start to get in touch with our human part of our brain, and you have to do that when you write. Animals don't write. Well, elephants do. They paint pictures. I get so off track. Okay, abstinence list. Just keeping you in mind with what ritualization actually is. It's really hard to break ritualization and recognize that you're in it when you don't even know what it is to begin with. So if you've already documented it, that's a really big deal. Some organizations call that the 3 circles. It's that middle circle stuff or the second circle stuff. And recovery ritual. So you replace one ritual with a better ritual, and you have healthy coping strategies. Barrier 4, again, this is pretty intense experience when you're down here. There's a lot of work to do once you get to this one. But again, it's about having clarity and looking around. So sobriety statement, first aid kit, there's a lot of tools here, but they're all usually done with a professional to help you really gain some clarity around your experience. You know, 12-step process, intervention, getting other people involved. It's because you're back into some old patterns and there needs to be a shift, and turning that ship around is not easy. Okay. I feel like I'm talking a little fast, Alana, to go on to Q&A, because we definitely want to leave time if you guys have questions. Let's see. The question that came up is okay, so we're going to transition right now into any Q&A stuff that you have. So any of you that are super polite and wait for the very last minute, go ahead and throw your questions here. Anything's fine. You know, disclosures, when are those appropriate? To, you know, what does healthy sex look like? To, my husband's not even here, how do I get him here? Anything that you want to ask is more than appropriate. The question that came up is can you read that on?
Yeah. What's the best advice to someone who is trying to work with his own shame?
You want to
go? Sure. Shame goes really deep. And shame is one of those things that's usually tied to multiple things. There's not just one thing that we go, oh, I have shame because this one thing happened to me at one time. Usually it's a whole combination of things. When we have sexual addiction or patterns of sexual acting out, most of those people come from rigid and disengaged families. And so often we have family of origin patterns and shame that has come from that. We have shame if you're in maybe a very conservative religious culture, or if like sexuality in your family or your religious culture was very taboo, we can have lots of shame there. There can be shame around if you've had any trauma, shame around just stepping into your own sexuality. Like there's so many different pieces to it. So there's some Brene Brown, she researches on vulnerability and shame. Any of her books are great resources to get your brain start thinking about it. I really like shame work. Do it with a coach or a therapist too, because there is something about somebody else being able to kind of hold up that mirror and help you see things that you can't always see on your own. And the antidote to shame is being able to voice that and express it and and take it from that kind of hidden dark place and bring it into the light. So those are a few things I would suggest. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, the best starting place to become shame resilient is to go to a group where it's safe. And you show up with a group of people and you say, hey, here's my ugly. And people don't cast you out. Hopefully, don't cast you out because you share your ugly. In fact, they find it endearing at some level and they go, yeah, me too. Brené Brown stuff is wonderful with shame. So you start to read it. Again, it can be geared a lot towards women. So if you're a man, just put yourself in there, pretend like she's talking to guys.
There's a question that came in at the very beginning, Luke. It went into me and you in the chat.
Okay.
And it's a great question. It says, I have been married for 38 years, found out husband was into pornography 3.5 years ago. I feel my spouse is in denial. He wants our relationship to move on and feels I am the problem. I am wondering about divorce a lot, looking to figure things out so hard. I just for a sec want to speak to that denial. It goes very, very deep. And denial, again, I think I said this in the beginning, but having somebody else help you break through your denial. And denial is not that they're just trying to lie or trying to squirm away from it and be a difficult person. Denial literally is like hardwired into us as self-protection, because what's underneath the denial is too scary or too hard. Now, this isn't like a free pass of like, oh, you have denial because it's too hard underneath, so you can just stay in your denial. But there's a reason the denial is showing up. And so them finding a safe person that they can work through that is really, really good. And I have so much empathy for you, because where you're being told that you're the problem and that is being put on you is really challenging. And I'm not going to say at all like who's right and who's wrong, because I have no idea where your relationship is, but I do hear so much pain in your question and the way you phrase that. So I just have lots of empathy.
Yeah. So before somebody really addresses denial, they have to have humility. They have to step into willing to look at things differently and at least start it. Because there's no clarity at the very beginning. There's very, very little clarity. And then once you address that denial, cool things start to happen.
Well, and the relationship is not going to repair. People hear this from me all the time. My 4 emotional pieces that the relationship cannot heal if the person who is betrayed does not have humility, vulnerability, empathy, and transparency. Those 4 things. And we need each of them. And I'll go to groups and I'll say this to men. And I have had this comment to me so many times where they go like, ugh, those are the hard ones. Like you just said the hardest ones. And I'm like, I know. These are the hardest ones, but we cannot have the relationship heal without those in place. Now, it doesn't mean they have to be 100% we're perfect all the time, but it has to be building in those 4 areas.
Yeah. And there's so many of them that you don't get to judge. Your significant other gets to judge. There's so many times that I think I'm humble. I got humility. I got transparency. Especially the empathy one. I'm sure I'm being empathetic, but then I have a spouse that's like, I don't feel a lot of empathy coming across this way, so I have to be open. Somebody put a comment in more than the question that says, I feel like I need a self-esteem course. For sure. We do have 180. If you haven't heard of it before, a men's group, choose 180. And there's some wonderful tools in there around emotions. It's pretty, gaining self-esteem or gaining self-respect. That's not done without learning to recognize your own emotions, learning to manage them. And that's what that course is for. So come hang out with us. Alana, any certain one that we want to go to next?
Yeah, the question was, how does this apply to an affair if there's no porn or sexual addiction? And affairs, like, I don't care. There's lots of different reasons affair happen. I don't care which type of affair it is. There's always boundaries being crossed. And so this whole prevention plan is still talking about these boundaries you have been put in place. And we still get the same patterns with affairs of the lifestyle imbalances, the euphoric recall, like thinking back to the acting out, the impaired thinking, the boundary collapse, high risk situations, like all of those still apply. And so there may be a few in there that you're like, yeah, that doesn't quite apply, but generally speaking, we're still talking about boundaries and still talking about being able to know ourselves and heal the relationship with ourselves and put those barriers in place.
Yeah.
So hopefully I answered that enough, but if not, put follow up in the chat.
And we have, I mean, pick your drug of choice. It doesn't matter. It's a battle of emotions where we eventually act outside of our values. So if you thought the affair was a good idea, that's a different question. But if you recognize that it was damaging and you wish you wouldn't have done that, it's all the same patterns. You know, it's still crossing of values. It's just a label we put with it, which is, and Alana and I were talking about this earlier today. Addiction's a tough label, and sometimes it's a misused label, but it doesn't really matter because ultimately people show up and talk to Alana and I and say, hey, I'm not happy with the situation that I'm in. And sometimes labeling addiction can get in the way when somebody's in the denial phase, not necessarily because they're an addict, but because they're trying to gain clarity and they're so defensive to the labels, and that can really get us stuck. Okay. I'll just read the next one, Alana. How can we have a check-in without the husband going into shame and the wife feeling like he wasn't transparent enough, like he is withholding information? You know, it's hard to say, but it's a man that's going into shame just hasn't done he's still in the process of doing his work. He's still learning to manage his emotions. He feels shame because he doesn't feel like he's enough, or he's being attacked, or he's a doormat in the relationship. And it's just the ability to be able to manage emotions and being able to know when he can show up and when he can't in the relationship, and if he has the capacity. So if you can't do that, there's just more individual work to do, more of why is shame coming up, and is it shame too? It might be labeled as shame, but it might be something different than that. People don't wall off or attack just because of shame. Alana, any thoughts?
It's interesting because my brain is going to partners, and I'm thinking about, I'm going to speak for me and you, Luke. I can't stop Luke from having shame. And he can feel shame when there's accountability. He can feel shame when I'm attacking. He can feel shame when I create all the safety in the world. The shame really is his to work through. And my shame is mine to work through. But I also, at one point, I remember sitting in a therapy office, and the therapist said something to Luke. And he said, Luke, I don't think you trust her. And Luke was like, well, with this, like, I kind of don't. And I was like, what? Like, I'm losing my shit in my head. Like, how do you not trust me? But the reality is, going back to his own individual work, he at the time still didn't trust himself, and he couldn't trust people outside of himself. And so that was true for where we were at. But I've also learned that I can show up and I can help create a safer environment for him to share. And I can also make a very difficult environment to share. Now, when I'm working with men who have sexually acted out, I will still say, like, you got to learn to do this because of it's right and not based off of her reaction. And we need to be sensitive to her, but you have to learn how to live within your own values. And for my partners, I want you to recognize, and I had to recognize my impact on him. Now, I can't control his shame. And I'm not going to try to control that, because then I'm stepping into unhealthy territory that's not mine to own or to control. But I also do want to be aware of the impact. And so it kind of is a hard thing sometimes to navigate. But when it comes to him and his shame, like you said, Luke, is recognizing that there's a lot of pieces there to work out. And if it becomes too much, like if shame is overtaking him, then and I'm speaking to you, if shame's overtaking you, then you need to take a pause and you need to get regrounded and then try again and come back. And sometimes it's like when a little kid is learning to swim. And first we learn to go under the water. And at first they can go underwater and it's like up and down. And like, that's all I can do. Like, okay, like I'm choking. And then maybe then they learn how to put their face in for just a little bit. And then they come out of the water. And then they learn how to go underwater and maybe they can stay under for like 10 seconds and then they come out. And then with time, they know how to just swim in the water and they're not even worried about holding their breath. And so learning how to A, not run from shame, B, work through the shame, and then C, let that shame be seen by the person who their opinion to you often matters the most. That it takes work to do all of that.
And I want to give you something. I assume this was the wife that put this, the partner. She said the next part, she said, and the wife feeling like he wasn't transparent enough, like he was withholding information. I want to validate you for a second, okay? Because yeah, he wasn't transparent if he's in shame. And he was withholding information if he's in shame. He doesn't have the ability to communicate because his shame response is so overtaking and it's so big. So now withholding information, often you might run to, okay, did he just act out? Did he just lose, did he just have a slip? Is he in relapse? Like what's happening right now? Not necessarily withholding, but he can't be open. He can't be vulnerable when shame is there. So yeah.
And you can't have shame and empathy at the same time.
No.
You can't, those two you can't hold at the same time. Shame will block being able to be empathetic with the other person.
So just one last comment on this piece. So if you have a husband who is constantly showing up to every check-in and just can't even hold space for you at all because of shame, that's just one-on-one work. If there's times in your check-ins that he's present and he's there, or you notice him go into shame and then he's able to process through it and get back out, that's normal. That's a regular experience, okay? So with being present 100% there all the time and never feeling shame, that's not even human experience. It's just, so are we talking about all the time or just some of the time? So you put in there, it sounded like all the time, but just wanted to comment on that part. Alana, can you talk about timing here real quick with what we have left and all that stuff?
Yeah, we normally wrap up around top of the hour and sometimes we'll go a few minutes after. We still have quite a few questions, a lot of questions, more questions than we've ever had that we haven't gotten to. So I think what we'll do here is save some of these for our next month. And I'm so sorry. I wish I could get to every question. We won't have time to do that. But the next couple of questions we might answer just a little bit faster. So please be patient, but you're going to get some like Dear Abby. Young people probably don't even know what that is. Dear Abby was a newspaper person that would give just short little answers. So we'll probably give you just some fast Dear Abby type answers.
Yeah. And we'll also recognize that if you're going to jump off, we totally understand. And we have the recording going too. Okay, so Alana, one part that I want to touch on here, and this one actually came in, it says, my husband never has come forward with his sex and porn addiction. He was caught. Is there anything I can do to help him get some courage to come forward? I so wish you were here because I just would ask you, I'd say, do you want me to be brutally honest and truthful? So I'm just going to lean on the side of just straight with you. You can't do anything. Okay. You can't do anything to get him to come forward and have courage. What you can do is you can get really healthy inside of yourself, which is to have good, solid boundaries around living with somebody who is not doing anything to change patterns. So Alana said, hey, I can't live with somebody that makes these kind of choices and falls in these patterns that does not seek for help outside of themselves one-on-one. So here's the interesting thing about somebody that's caught compared to somebody that comes forward, okay? Somebody that's caught is absolutely in denial, 100% in denial. It's thick. They have to process through it. They don't even know how much denial they're in, okay? Somebody that comes forward, there's less denial to work through, okay? So denial can't be worked through on your own. It just can't. It's not something you're going to all of a sudden have clarity on all this compartmentalizing you've been doing. So anyway, I'm going to stop on that. Alana, you want to tackle anything else you want to tackle?
No, I just have lots of empathy for that because it can feel really helpless and hopeless when your partner is not choosing to do the work.
Yeah.
And powerless. It can feel really powerless. And one of my favorite quotes that I used to use all the time was control the controllables. I can't control other people, but there's a lot of things in my own world, in my own environment, I can control for me. And that helped me feel less out of control when I could control the controllables.
Okay, there's one more with a theme that I'm going to just tackle on that I think I'm good, and you can tackle anything else you want. I mean, call it a night. There's this person that put in a question that says, I think my husband is withholding information during check-in because just the idea of having a check-in reminds him that he acted out. But that leaves me with a feeling like he doesn't want to be transparent. Here's the deal. You don't need to actually know all the details of all his behavior. That's what he will be sharing with you as he learns about recovery and learns how to share information and become transparent. What you need to see as the partner is the overall big picture of how this man is showing up and changing. And sometimes you don't want to look at that. You don't want to say, overall, I don't see any shifts. In fact, I have somebody really close to me that I know that says, overall, this person isn't doing anything different. I can't lean and hang my hat on something that's different. So you're just going to look for them to move their feet or do something different. And that's what you should be looking for. Sometimes we get too far in the weeds of what little piece am I missing, then you actually have what you need, which is the bigger picture and which direction they're headed. Are they making changes? And then you have really wonderful people like Alana and other professionals that can help you dissect that. But the biggest thing I say is trust your intuition, trust the big picture. Don't make knee-jerk response. Okay, go ahead, Alana.
Okay. And I totally know what you're saying here, but I want to clean this up just a tiny bit because I totally can hear an individual who is not ready to own their stuff say, well, Luke just said I don't have to share anything. I just have to share the big picture. And I know that's not at all what you're saying. But as a betrayed partner, you get to know as much as you want to know and need to know. And in the beginning, I needed to know a lot. Now what I want to know and need to know looks very different. And it's okay wherever you are, just you can't unhear things. So the word you used, Luke, was like the little details. Like go work out all of the little details and take someone else through the dirt and the mud. So when you come to your partner, you can be accountable. This is what happened, or this is where I'm at, and here's my plan for change and recovery. Here's my plan to keep moving forward. Here's my plan that I'm creating safety for myself. But there's still that accountability piece. So I know, Luke, I know exactly what you meant, but I also know that certain people could have taken that and been like, well, Luke said. So I wanted to just make that super, super clear that always be transparent with your partner. But like you said, Luke, work it through with somebody else. So all of the like cleaning it up and the mess and the muck and the trying to even figure out where you're at and how you went wrong, and don't put that on your wife. Work that through someone else. So your wife gets, here's what happened, here's what you need to know, and here's what I'm doing to create the safety.
Yeah.
Those can go together.
Thank you for cleaning that up. Thank you so much. I'm glad we
tagged. You said it great. For those who have the foundation, knew exactly what you were talking about. I just didn't want someone who didn't have that foundation to run with that. But this question where it says, because the idea of having check-ins reminded him that he acted out, I hear in that still a running from painful feelings. And healthy individuals don't run from hard feelings. We learn, this is the emotional EQ. This is what they work on a lot in the 180 groups, is we learn how to face our hard feelings and work through them, because that's what healthy adults do. And sometimes it takes us a while to get there. Is it okay if I go to the next one?
Yeah. And then are we wrapping up after that, or you want to keep
it? I'm going to just do the next two really fast. Any tips on when your full disclosure is complete and done? A lot of times with the full disclosure process, we have this idea of like, okay, now we did the full disclosure. Now we should trust each other and we can just come together and move forward. the reality is that full disclosure is a really important, healthy tool on the path. I'm a huge proponent of full disclosures when you're doing them with trained professionals who know what they're doing. But we still are in the same relationship we were the day before disclosure. And so we still have the healing of the relationship. We have another puzzle piece put into place, but we still have this huge puzzle we're putting together. And it's a big puzzle piece. But I highly suggest after disclosure, if there is enough safety in the relationship, to get with a couples therapist who is trained in the betrayal trauma model, who can help you as a couple start bridging some of these gaps back together, and who is going to who is trained to be sensitive in betrayal trauma.
Yeah.
Because traditional couples therapy can be really damaging if it's done too early. And then the next question, how does a healthy sexual relationship look like between both parties? That is a whole course in and of itself. But I can tell you, if you look up what sexual abuse entails, go the total opposite. So it's going to be things like consent. And by the way, Amy and I just did a podcast episode with Jeff Struer on consent. And you'll never hear me probably say this again. I want everybody to listen to this one. I want men to listen to this. I want women to listen to this. If you have children, if you're in a relationship, if you were in a relationship, if you're ever going to be in a relationship or know anyone in a relationship, listen to that episode, because consent and healthy consent is one of the foundational pieces of healthy sexuality. Getting comfortable with your own sexuality, getting comfortable with yourself, figuring out what your own shame and barriers are to sexuality as an individual, and then be really, really patient for the sexual relationship to heal. Usually that's one of the last pieces to heal. And it's hard because it's really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I wish I could get more, because it's a great topic.
All right, everybody, we had so much that we didn't get a chance to tackle. So Alana and I are going to go comb through it all so we can pull it into next time. So it was really wonderful spending time with you. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the participation, and have a wonderful evening. We will talk to you later. Have a good night.